Hello, and a huge welcome to the podcast, Lucy. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and talk to me today. I'm really excited to dive into your career with you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So, I want to start with the elephant in the room, which is often recruiters get a bad rep. And I wanted you to come onto this podcast to debunk that idea because I think you are wonderful. So, what would
Thank
you
you.
say? So, what would you say to anybody who thinks that about recruiters?
Well, I think it's probably fair to say lots of people in sales get a bad rep, estate agents, car sales people, and I think it really depends on who you work with and how they work. I think recruiters get a bad name because sometimes we overpromise and underdeliver, and that's frustrating for the people on the receiving end. So I'm just trying to do it in a bit more of a human way where we can have honest conversations, and it takes, it's a relationship building partnership, so it takes time from both parties, and hopefully building some broken bridges along the way.
And like you said, I think it's so important putting people at the forefront of it because
Yeah,
changing career, not just even changing career, but changing job is a big
yeah, it's a
thing.
big deal. It's a
It's a
really big
big
deal.
deal. It takes months, months and months to look for a job. The interview process can be really long. And then
Yeah,
actually just starting the job as well. I know any
yeah,
job I've started, it often takes me a few months, if not like sometimes up to 6 months to
yeah. It's a lot of
feel
energy.
relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of energy. And I think when you work in that space day in, day out, it's easy to disconnect from that. But I think the constant reminder that to this person, the candidate or the client I'm dealing with, it's actually important to them we get this right, and the support we give them along the way, I think really makes a difference.
Yeah. And like I say, that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you today. So I do know you've started your own consultancy company, but I want to talk about that a bit later. But I kind of want to start with the beginning of your career and really dig deep into how you got to where you are today. So let's go back to the beginning. How did your career, start for you?
It's not, I've had a mixed career, I would say. So I actually started in childcare. So I've worked in nurseries, and then I was a private nanny for about 10 years. And alongside that, I ran a nanny agency. So we helped families find nannies. So not the traditional, I would say, traditional career path. And then there just became a point in my career where I wanted to have a bit of a break on the childcare before having my own children. So a natural progression was to go into kind of commercial recruitment. So I left the agency, my first business, and nannying, and went in kind of as trainee IT consultant within a local agency.
And how did you find out that this was a career for you? Because, like you say, it is such a difference,
Yeah,
nannying, childcare
very
to
different.
tech.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how did you discover that this was a career then that you could go into?
Well, I think I really liked the aspect of dealing with people when I had my first business. So speaking to the nannies and speaking to the families and really understanding what made a good match. And I think I just carried that over in my full-time job in IT, my first role. Really like talking to people. I really like helping people. And I got a huge sense of satisfaction when I found someone a job, and they were grateful for that. And it's kind of turning the not the cards, flipping it so they don't dislike me, they like me because I've helped them. So changing that for people, I think, is important.
Yeah, because like we just said before, it is such a big jump. And then, like I say, now you've got your own recruitment company. So did you work in another company before, or did you just go straight into running your own business
No,
again?
so obviously, when I went from nannying into my first recruitment role, I kind of had to make a decision on what industry I wanted to go into. And before I was a nanny, I was a carer. So lots of people were saying, oh, maybe you should go into nursing recruitment. But I was always the kind of technical person within my first business. So the one that found the database, the one that could find things that we accidentally deleted. And I just had a bit of an interest in that, and it's ever changing. So it kept my interest peaks as it's always changing tech. So that's why I thought I'll give tech a go. Yeah, and just grew to love it more and more, really. So I've worked small local agencies, and then I worked for a bigger national agency. And then I worked for another startup with my old manager. which was lovely. But then I had children, so things needed to change. And there's a lot of people and things in recruitment that happen, on the website they say things and then actually uh that's not followed through. So I'm just a bit of a stickler for the rules. If I'm saying I'm going to do something, I really will do it. And I don't, my worst thing is to overpromise and underdeliver. So if I don't think I can help you, I'll be honest and tell you that. So that's kind of why I went out on my own, just to be accountable and make sure I was doing the right thing by the people I was working with.
And I think you touched on something there, which I think is so nice, which is those transferable skills. You say
Yeah,
you were the person in your previous agency that was, quote, the more technical one. You would find the database one. And then that feels like it's such a nice transition of skills that even though
yeah,
they are completely different industries, actually there were so many transferable skills.
yeah. There's lots. Yeah, there's lots of transferable skills. And I talk to people who want to get into tech all the time. And they say, I haven't come from a tech background. I'm like, no, but you've got so many transferable skills that I think people can't recognize in themselves. So sometimes it's about sitting down and having those conversations of I know what clients are looking for and what can be learned on the job and what you can do in your own time to help with that.
There are so many people at codebar that, CVs that I'll look at, or like I say, people who have changed careers, like switched, and they say, none of my skills are relevant. And then, like you say, once you start digging into it, you're
Yeah.
like, actually, there are so many that are.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's just having a fresh pair of eyes who maybe can see it from a client. It's hard to be reflect on your own work or your own CV, and I think sometimes when you've got someone new come in and say, "I know my clients look for X, Y, and Z," and you've actually got that, so let's just highlight that and bring that to light so someone can see that really easily. I think it makes a big difference.
I remember once at one of our events, it was an event really focused on like contributing to open source. So, we were teaching people how to
Yeah,
like fork a repository, create a pull request, submit for the first time. And I remember sitting down with this woman, and she said, "Well, I really want to move into tech, but like I don't think any of my like skills are transferable. Like I want to contribute something, but I don't know what." And it turned out that she spoke four languages.
wow.
And what she discovered is that she could actually contribute so much to, let's say, the Codebar website, because we have translations on the website. We have
Yeah,
this big file that has all the strings of every single bit of text. And I would say 60% of those strings aren't translated at the moment. Like it's a very slow process. And once
yeah,
I discovered this, I was like, there is so much you can contribute here. And by the end of the
yeah.
day, she had probably submitted the most pull requests out of anybody on the day. But
Wow.
her first comment to me was, I don't think I can contribute anything. But she could.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's highlighting that to people, isn't it? It's sometimes you need someone to tell you, no, actually you can. And I think that sometimes that's not done in the recruitment industry.
So, you say you've got your own business, and that's something I kind of want to talk about briefly because there might be people here that want to go down that route. Eventually they're moving into tech. How do you find like running your own business?
But it's fun. I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it, but you have to wear a lot of hats, and sometimes that can be hard. One minute you're doing this, and then you've got a call about something else. So it having to switch between tasks sometimes can be really tricky. And when we start business, we're good. I'm good at recruitment, but I'm not necessarily good at all the other aspects of business. So there's a lot of learning involved, or delegation, depends in which way you want to do it. I think delegate to people is key.
Yeah. Do you know what I say to people now, that because I've now been doing CodeBar full time for nearly 4 years, that I have no idea what job I would do because I've now got all these skills in like all these different
Yeah,
random areas of like, I can still write code, but I can also do fundraising for a charity, and
yeah.
I can run events. And I was like, I feel like I'm basically now unemployable.
No, you're the unicorn now that everyone wants. You're not unemployable.
No,
No
and,
way.
and like you say, I think also delegation is key because your time as a business owner is actually so important, and
Yeah,
and it's also I think about doing what you enjoy. And you said it earlier that you enjoy helping people, and it's like,
yeah,
well, do you know what? I don't want to be doing the accounts or the finances. Like I'm going to
yeah,
outsource that bit. I want to do the people bit. I want to help the
yeah.
people, and I think that's actually a really like key part of running your own business.
I think that sometimes takes some time to learn where's best to spend your time. But once you've got that balance right, and obviously at the beginning it's hard because the funds aren't always there to delegate, so you do have to do a lot of juggling and you have to wear a lot of hats. But when you get going, and I think there's never a good time. People say, "Oh, it's not a good time." I've literally just had my second baby. It was not probably not the best timing, but there is never a good time, I don't think, to take a leap of faith.
And do you find, like you say, you just had your second baby, so do you think it gives you like more flexibility as well in terms of like managing your own timetable?
Um, yes and no, because I think it gives me flexibility in terms of I don't have to be somewhere at set times in that aspect, but I do think I make up a lot of hours in the evenings, or sometimes I work at weekends to catch up because there's only me. So if there's stuff to do, I have to do it. And if I've promised delivery staff or projects, I don't like to let people down. So it is flexible. It does work for us, but there is a lot of hours that people don't see. I think you
Yeah.
think, oh, it's lovely, you just work around your kids, or but there's lots of other things that go on between that.
People often don't see, like you say, like the early mornings or,
Yeah.
the later evenings or the Sunday evening of like, do you know what, actually there's a few bits I need to do to catch up in
Yeah.
before my Monday starts.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of that. There is lots of that involved.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have it anywhere any other way. I mean, it's definitely a juggle, but it's worth it.
So now I want to pivot to a different conversation around. We have a lot of people in the codebar community who may be putting together their CV for the first time or about to interview for the first time. So, how would you, if someone's listening to this and they're about to apply for a job, but let's say there are, and this is very likely, say 40, 50 other people going for that, say, junior developer role,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to them to make their CV in particular stand out amongst all the others? Particularly, I think, as well, now in a world with AI that can improve people's CVs, let's say. So, what advice would you give to them to make theirs stand out?
I think most importantly is a CV is use it to get your foot in the door to get the interview. Don't try and tell them everything on your CV, which I think sometimes people kind of offload everything on their CV. So read the job description, really highlight the skills you've got if that's transferable skills, make it really easy for people to read to see that you've got the right skills. So I do say tailor CVs for the application, which takes time, but I do think it gives you the most kind of success rate. And honestly, the CVs that stand out to me are the ones that are written by a person, not AI. Because even though you think they don't sound like AI, they do
They do.
because they don't sound personal or personable, and everyone's got wise to that now. So I think write your own CV, get someone to read it through, and offer some help. And obviously, I'm happy to help anyone with CV formats or help with that because I think it's tricky to start to get a good basis and then work from that.
And what about CVs you see that are like, because I've seen some CVs that are like really like design heavy,
Yeah.
really, I think they're actually quite amazing. But I've also heard some people say, oh, actually, no, we don't like those. So what are your thoughts on those types of CVs?
Ooh, I think CVs are everyone's got opinion on CVs, haven't they? Should it be 2 pages? Should it not? Should it have your picture on? Should it not? I think there's industries kind of like marketing and design where you see really different CVs because that's kind of the area they work in. I think it's personal preference, but I think there's a lot of bias that goes on recruitment, and we need to try and minimize that. So I wouldn't recommend people putting photos on their CV because I think that can be another barrier to entry, unconsciously or consciously. But again, you might ask someone else and they say, no, definitely put your photo on your CV. So I think it depends. But I think a basic layout that's easy to read, that flows well, is probably what I would recommend.
And I guess in a tech world, what are your thoughts on like a website portfolio? Because I think for maybe developer roles, they're encouraged quite a lot. But I
Yeah.
guess that's harder to apply for a job because you don't want to go, oh, well, just here's my link and like do all the work yourself.
Yeah.
But there is also a place for them where they're incredibly useful.
So I think links on your CV are really good. GitHub accounts, any portfolios you've got to showcase that. But again, I think we are still a bit old fashioned that we want to see a CV. We still, unfortunately, haven't moved away from that. And it's hard to sell yourself on a piece of paper because we're human beings. And I think when you work with good recruiters and consultants, they can really fight your corner and say, just trust me, I've had this conversation. But when you're starting out, sometimes you don't have that confidence to push back or ask those questions. And I think definitely showcasing your work as a developer and your coding is a really good thing to have on your CV. But I wouldn't spend, if you haven't got one, I wouldn't spend loads of time doing one because I think you can get to interview without that.
And your thoughts on a cover letter?
Well, I just sometimes feel that companies ask a lot of job seekers, and I'm all for one showing that you're passionate and you're interested in the vacancy that they've got, but you do have to consider their time it takes them to write, and I mean write, not AI generated, write a cover letter that's bespoke to each role. And if they're going to read them all, because if they get 500 applicants, you're actually going to read all of those cover letters. And if you're applying for 6 jobs a week, that's 6 cover letters. That's a lot of work. And looking for a job is time consuming, emotionally, it can feel difficult. It's very full on. And I think it's just I think if you're going to read it, if the company's going to read it and the hiring manager's going to read it, great. If it's just a tick box exercise to prove you're not a bot, not great for me.
Yeah, and I often find that they're often all the same anyway. Like cover letters, you start by saying you really want the job there, the company's great, these are my skills, I'm really interested, please hire me. And you're kind of like, well,
Yeah.
really are any of them that different? Like, I don't know. To me, when
Well,
I
I just don't know what I struggle sometimes to understand what the purpose is, what's it serving apart from making people really uh like for that role. And I just think if your CV is good, your CV should be enough. Or if you're asking for specifics in a cover letter, but just a generic cover letter, I don't personally understand the purpose. But again, everyone does feel really differently about that. To be on the receiving end as a job seeker that might have been out of work due to redundancy, because there's been so many tech redundancies recently, you could be a really strong candidate, and it starts to get really hard when you're writing cover letter after cover letter after cover letter, because then you start doubting yourself and you don't hear back. And then it's just a not very nice circle to be, place to be in.
and the tech industry is really difficult at the moment. There are so many applicants per job. If,
Yeah.
let's say I'm a junior developer and I'm applying and this is going to be my first tech job, how would I make myself stand out rather than just, obviously, like I said, I've got this bit of paper, this CV, and I may have a few projects on GitHub, but is there anything else I can do to make myself stand out?
when you're applying
Yeah.
when you're applying for the role. Yeah, I think when it's a junior role, talking about why you're passionate to get into the industry is really important. There's a lot of people, I'm sure you're aware, who've been in the industry a long time who feel like kind of this is their space. And I talk a lot about having more diversity and being more inclusive. And I think we have to look at things differently, and people are going to portray themselves differently to someone that might have been in the industry for 30 years. And it's about being open-minded to where these people come from. Maybe they'll come as a career switcher, maybe they'll come, through codebar. I think there's so much unconscious bias of where these people should come from and how they should look. So I think be passionate about why you want to move into tech, try and portray, be you on that piece of paper. You can be you and still be professional. I think lots of people are worried about not being professional, but I mean, I've read some really good CVs, and I think you don't have to be rigid, and we don't all look the same, do we? So, and I think follow up. There's so much power in following up. So if you've applied for a role, I always say to people, make sure you're logging where you're applying and who the contact is. Just send them a polite email if you haven't heard back to say, I wondered if there's any feedback, because especially at a junior level, that's how we learn moving forward. So if they said your CV was great, but you just don't have the right kind of tech stack, or your CV didn't read very well, they can learn from that. They can grow and change, and it helps people, gives them the motivation to keep going. I think when we don't hear anything, it gets tiring. But I think lots of people don't want to follow up. But there's a lot of power in that because sometimes your application doesn't go where it's meant to go and they don't get it. So yeah, I think politely following up is one of the biggest things I would say to people.
And also, sometimes people are just busy. So, it might be that you sometimes when you're so busy with, like, let's say you've got a deadline at work, you might
Yeah,
not realize that 2 weeks have passed since you did that interview. And for you, sometimes when you're so deep in it, you kind of forget that time passes so quickly. But for that person interviewing,
yeah,
that 2 weeks
it
probably
doesn't.
feels so long.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember is that for me, recruitment is kind of my day job. So, but for the hiring managers or the founder of the business who's hiring, recruitment isn't their main job. They've got lots of other hats they're wearing. And that can be the same with talent teams, internal talent teams. They could be working 20 odd roles. So I think to be patient and understand that people don't mean to always ignore people or not hear back, just sometimes think it's normally an add-on to their day job.
Yeah, I'd never kind of thought of it like that actually. And what about once you get to the interview process? So, like I say, there then might be people here that are a bit further in their career
Yeah,
journey and they're about to, start their interview or go for their interview for the first time. What advice would you have for those people who are currently interviewing or about to interview for the first time? Because tech is quite niche. I think in an interviewing style, it's really unique to
yeah,
anything
yeah,
else.
yeah. And it's all very different depending on what you're interviewing for. So I think it depends what roles you're interviewing for. I would always say if you're working with a good consultant, they should give you what their interview is going to entail. So if that's a technical test, or some clients do psychometric testing, some clients just do, I would say, a normal skills kind of scenario based question. So get as much information as you can from either the consultant you're working with or the company directly. Just ask, what can I expect during the interview? Ask the names of the people you're meeting. I would always say do a little bit of research on them. Go on LinkedIn, have a little look and see where their backgrounds are to just get some common ground, learn a little bit more about the company. And the other thing I think that sounds a bit crazy, but really does work is practicing out loud to get used to answering questions that we're not used to answering on a day-to-day basis. So get used to talking about, your skills and make sure you read the job spec before you go so you can articulate yourself.
I think particularly practicing answers to technical questions. That's from my experience when I've been, I haven't
Yeah,
interviewed now in a few years for a technical role, but I remember when those would always be the questions that I'd like stumble on a little bit more. Whereas, like,
yeah,
if you ask me any of the personal questions, like, tell me a
yeah,
time in your life when you've struggled or, you've had to deal
yeah,
with this, like, those ones I feel like I could talk until, I was blue in the face. But it would then be the technical ones that the person would probably know I was least confident talking
yeah,
about. So that's a really good tip is to, yeah, like, think about what those questions might be and actually
yeah.
practice those. Yeah, I like that.
And I think sometimes we're all guilty. We say we, and some companies won't like that. They like to know what especially in senior leadership, what you've done to help with X, Y, and Z. And I think if we start talking about it out loud, we get better at articulating those answers. So we come across, and I think interview, no one really enjoys an interview, do they? I think it's it's quite a scary, unnatural environment to be in if it's you and three people sat there. So I think if you don't understand the question, it's totally fine to ask for them to repeat it or word it in a different way and ask for any prep up front so if it's going to be technical questions or if it's just a HR interview or if you're meeting the team. Like I say, that should come, but sometimes you know we take that for granted. The more information you can get about the company and what you're going into, I think the more relaxed we can be.
Yeah, I like that. I had someone recently say that they were going for an interview and this company had hosted a code bar workshop before. And they said because they knew the venue, because they knew the space, and they knew the journey there, they said they actually ended up feeling much more relaxed because
Yeah,
there was just some familiarity in going to this
yeah,
environment rather than everything being unknown.
no,
They were
yeah,
like, well, I knew the journey there. I knew the office. I just even knew how to get into the building.
yeah. That
And
makes
they
a
said,
huge difference.
yeah, they knew where the toilet was. I think they even said to me that when
Yeah,
they arrived, they was like, I need a quick wee. But they
yeah,
they knew where the toilet was because they'd remembered going there for a co bar workshop. And it was something that I kind of reflected on afterwards that I didn't think that that would be one of the benefits to the way our workshops run, which is, we go into these tech spaces all the time. We wanted
Yeah,
to do it because we wanted to be a bit nosy, and we wanted to see in tech spaces.
yeah,
And we kind of knew it would be good for people meeting and potentially recruitment, but we didn't realize that that would be one of the benefits of
yeah,
that stage in the interview. And I was like, do you know, that's actually amazing. I'm going to now start telling that to companies when they're interested
yeah,
in hosting us.
yeah, yeah. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Like you said, it brings some familiarity. I can't say that word. Familiarity.
Familiarity. It's a long word.
Skip over that bit. Edit that bit out.
Yeah, no, I know. It makes total sense. And so maybe if someone's now at the process where, they've done the interview, so they've sent the CV, they've got to the second round, they've done the interview, maybe they've done, like I say, like an online one and then an in-person
Yeah,
one. And, maybe they haven't heard again for like 2, 3 weeks. Would you recommend they also follow up at that point as well?
yeah. I think I'm not, I'm not sure that every company would agree with me encouraging people to follow up. But I think if we've invested our time as job seekers to do 2 interviews, it should be expected that companies are coming back with a yes or no. And if they're coming back with a no, ideally with some feedback around to why that person wasn't right. And I think the more job seekers and candidates that do that, the more companies will kind of get that expectation and it will become second nature. So people, like you say, I don't ever think it's deliberate. I don't ever think it's deliberate, but I think communication is really important in the candidate journey when looking for work. So I say to candidates, oh, you'll hear, you've got your interview then, we'll hear within the next 2 weeks. If there's a delay, I would ring and tell them why. Even if that's I can't get hold of them, I would communicate that. And I think communication is really important. So ask at interview when should I expect to hear?
Yeah, like you said, I think that communication is so key because, like you said, even if you then communicate to that candidate, I've just not heard back yet, but like just hold on.
Yeah,
There's just so much like comfort in that, like you say, rather than that person being at home anxious, a bit stressed that, oh, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't heard.
yeah,
Like you say, I think sometimes for the company and the person interviewing, like you say, like it's not the only thing going on. But if you're
yeah,
interviewing and say you haven't got a job, for you it could be the only thing,
yeah,
interviewing and
yeah.
finding a job.
Especially if you're
So
really interested in that role, it's hard to keep keep motivated to keep looking if you really want that role. So I think it is really important.
yeah,
You're on
yeah,
the
yeah.
way.
And do you have? I feel like I know I'm asking you like, what about advice for this
No,
bit, advice for this
no,
bit?
it's
But
fine.
I think it's because I just
My
want to
job.
like pick. I just want to pick your brain so much. But do you have just any other advice, just generally for people who are like thinking about entering tech? Yeah, just any other general advice or tips.
I think well, the tech space is glorious, and I couldn't be a bigger advocate of it. I think entry level and moving into tech can feel really tricky. So utilize a network. So go to any events that there are locally. Codebar is a fantastic way to meet and grow your network within the space. Go to any open days. Sometimes there's company events. Just go, like you say, go and have a look round. LinkedIn, I think lots of people just think that's for work, but it's a really good. I mean, there's a lot of noise on there, but it's like any platform. There's a lot of good stuff on there if you know where to look. And I think if you're working with good consultants, that they'll also know companies, even if they're not recruiting, that might take on junior space, people in the junior space. So be busy finding people, talking to people, because I think you never know where your next job opportunity is going to come through. And I think the more we talk to people, the more we tell people what we want, whether that's on LinkedIn or whether that's through conversations we have at a coffee shop or events, the better, because then people will keep their ear out for you and you just don't know where it's going to come from or who knows who they know.
Yeah, it's so true. I think I've had a few opportunities happen just at the most random times.
Yeah. Yeah. I spoke to a copywriter the other day and she said my best client came from dancing on the dance floor with someone. I was like, oh, I love that.
I had it I think it was like no, not last summer, the summer before, where so I live in the mountains and I was ice climbing, and it turned out one of the people on the course was he was a recruiter, and he recruits tech people, and he kind of started like asking me questions that were
As you-
alluding to, oh, he's trying to like fill these roles. And it was kind of funny because I was like, do you know what, actually, like, and I very politely was like, actually, I'm here to ice climb. If you want to
yeah,
talk about a job role, you
yeah.
can buy me a
Here's my
coffee in
diary
the
list.
week. And you know what he did? He did, to be fair. I was kind of like, I'm here to ice climb, not talk
Yeah,
about tech or
yeah.
JavaScript or whatever. I said, but if you want to talk about this, you can buy me a
Let's have a
coffee in the
coffee.
week.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I
And
think that's the thing. And I think if you come out of uni, you're all coming out at the same time. It's quite a saturated market. It feels tricky. And I just think there's lots of events, even if it's an online event. Follow up with people, talk to people, and yeah, try and grow your network that way. Because I think there are junior jobs in the space. They feel much harder to get into, and it's just about being. I think with job seeking now, it's not all come on a job board, apply. There's a much more multi-pronged attack, so to speak, when we're looking at how we're looking for work.
like you said as well, those connections on LinkedIn, like, if you meet people at a tech event, even if it's
Yeah,
virtually, like try and just connect with them on LinkedIn because you never know if they might make a post that's
yeah,
advertising a junior role at their company. And
yeah.
yeah, I think networking and the people is so important.
Yeah, and I think put on there what you're looking for. Write on there that you're a career switcher or you're new to the industry. Ask for mentors or ask. I think it's quite daunting asking for help, but you'll be amazed how many people want to help. And I mean, that's how when I first came into IT in the recruitment space, that's how I learned. I was really honest with the people on the phone and said, I'll be honest, it's my first week. Can you tell me about what you're doing? People are very passionate about tech. They love to tell you. So I think you'll be surprised when you ask how many people want to help you.
Yeah, it's so true. It's I think it's one of the very rare industries where people do just like it's like tech conferences, local meetups, like people are
Yes.
always sharing their knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I did a little bit of work with the defense and within the defense space, and they are not like this. They don't really share their knowledge. And I think that's odd to me because I work in a space where there is so much open sharing and helping each other. Even GitHub's designed where other developers can say, this is great, but if you tried this, it might be better. So yeah, I think it feels scary to start with, but asking for help is a thing that you'll be surprised how many people want to help you.
Well, I think that's a lovely way to end, which is ask for help. I think that's so lovely. Thank you so much, Lucy, for coming on today, sharing so many wonderful tips and tricks to people, all different, stages in their journey. So, yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.